Just finished up my first game of Rebel Fury. I was very excited to play this. I picked this game up. Well, actually, I had someone pick it up for me from the weekend in the warehouse at GMT last, when was that, April? May, something like that. So I got my first game in. Now, I'm familiar with the system because I have played Gettysburg from C3I. I've played Waterloo Campaign, and I've played Beta's Campaign, which is the most recent game in the system, though not designed by Mark Herman. That one is Second Punic War. I really like Waterloo Campaign. I think that was probably the best game in the series, the system so far. But everyone's been talking about Rebel Fury, and there's a new combat system that's not just a D6 differential, which made me very happy. It's a D10 system now that integrates terrain and sort of tactical positioning, a number of variables. And I'm here to say that it is fantastic. I think really the new combat system pushes this over the edge. The greater scale and number of units pushes this over the edge. There's just so much stuff that happens that's built into the system rules that sort of enforces historicity, which is genius in so many ways. So tonight I played an opponent, someone who actually haven't played a game with in many years that we connected to play this. And we decided that we were going to do the Chickamauga scenario, which is recommended for a starting scenario if you are familiar with the system, which we both were, at least through Gettysburg. And we just had an absolute blast playing this game. I was the Union, he was the Confederates. And the game, well, let's recap the game so you can relive the drama with us. So when you start the Chickamauga scenario, you've got the Union stretched out on this side of the Chickamauga Creek. You've got the Confederates kind of loosely assembled here, and you've got kind of this running maneuver battle, let's say, up the creek, because and ultimately what both sides can do by winning a strategic victory, the Union, if they can keep this railroad from Chattanooga down to here open without running through Confederate units or zones of influence, they can win the game. Confederates, on the other hand, have a bunch of taller task for the auto win, and that is they need to connect via 50 road hexes from D to Chattanooga. You'll notice on the map that going this direction back here and around is too far. So that means the Confederates are kind of have the onus put upon them to open up some of this terrain through here, specifically through this gap, which historically the Confederates were trying to claim and keep open. Because if they can do that and control the roads that lead through there, they can win that auto victory. And so it's a 5-turn scenario, which so it plays pretty quick. We played in about 2.5 hours. We were both getting familiar with the gameplay systems again after so long from not playing Gettysburg, and there's some new stuff here. So we had this like kind of running battle. We had the Confederates kind of stretched out along here all the way back here. We had the Union stretched out, and so you're trying to, in the beginning of the scenario, manage the traffic jam of your divisions as they move up this road. The Union under Rosecrans had kind of a central command point here with most of their forces. They were bringing units up this way, and they were basically trying to protect the crossings across the creek to force the Confederates to fight into defensible terrain. We had a couple skirmishes early in this area over here. The Confederates were pushed back. Although they did kill a detachment, a Union detachment, which is basically the equivalent of like a regiment. And then the Union decided that they were going to cross down here near Dalton's Ford, near Glass Mill. So the Union sent kind of a couple of divisions across to try and envelop and separate the units that were down here from the rest of the Confederate army. We had some inconclusive skirmishing around here. Claiborne, who's the Confederates' best unit, was stuck on the wrong side of that kind of dividing maneuver. And then it became a war of maneuver. There wasn't many combats. We were essentially trying to get better position over each other. The Confederates had Bragg as their commander, and he was pretty effective at making sure that the Union couldn't attack in any real way. So, like I said, we had some skirmishes. The Union took some casualties. They were behind on the victory points for the game. And it was looking like around the midpoint of the scenario as the Union started to consolidate and the Confederates were kind of pushed. The Confederates had this center force here. It was Stewart and Preston and Liddell. They were pushed up across the creek, and they were kind of in a standoff with the Union. And then there was also an attempted crossing over here as well. The Union kind of repulsed that eventually. So it became kind of a standoff, and the points were so close that no one wanted to be the victim of a poor attack that went badly against them. And so it was coming down to the final turns. Longstreet and Polk showed up for the Confederacy, and then Thomas showed up for the Union on the final turn. And it basically all came down to these positions at the end. Both sides formed up in pretty neat lines. Confederates never did manage to cross the creek further towards north towards Chattanooga. I believe that's north. Anyways, further towards Chattanooga, most of their crossings were here in the center, and they could never get a foothold down on this end of the campaign. And on the final turn, the Union needed to score. They needed to eliminate a division to win. Basically, here's what the casualties looked like on the final turn. Wilder's dragoons or cavalry were eliminated. The 72nd Indiana and Minty's detachment had also been eliminated. And then on the Confederate side, Breckinridge's division had been eliminated. So the score here was 5-3. So the Union was just looking to find a division that they could eliminate. We had several combats up here around Buckner's Corps with the Union trying very hard to score a casualty. We did force Johnson and Kershaw back on the other side of the creek with attacks in here. It was actually McCook who came up from the gap. McCook came up here. We had a combat into this hex, forced Kershaw back, I believe. No, forced Johnston back. And then we had a combat here against Kershaw, forced Kershaw back. Then McCook came in here on this right flank of the Confederates. And at this point, the Union only had one artillery shot left. That was the last of their artillery supplies. The Confederates were not doing much better. They had two left. And we had a combat in here. Yeah, it was in here. So Palmer, no, was it in there? No, it was not in there. It was here. It was... I can't remember exactly where it is. It was somewhere in here. But essentially, what ended up happening was on the final combat of the final turn, Law's division ended up taking a casualty on a very poor roll, with both Longstreet and Thomas supporting the attack with their HQs. And it ended up being a very narrow Union victory on the final battle of the final turn of the scenario. We both kind of looked at each other and were like, wow, that was epic. It was really tense the whole way through. Just there's so much stuff that like happens just naturally as a course of the system's simple rules. There was a moment where here in this kind of like narrow pass here with the unit positioning, neither of us could get units along these roads without having to switch to battle formation. It was just like interdiction, force projection that interdicted movement in a way that was very difficult to overcome. So we were both trying to strangle each other's ability to get reinforcements up to this like upper flank here. And yeah, it was just a blast. I think this game really refines this system into something that is way more interesting and compelling than what you would have seen in previous entries. I think Waterloo Campaign comes the closest, where the maneuver is so highly emphasized on such a large playing area, but there's not a lot of units in that game. With all of the units in this game, you can do a lot of really interesting things in terms of like interdicting movement or doing flanking maneuvers, or like I did early, separating the army's advance on the tail end. And all of that stuff is just a byproduct of moving your units. And, we both really enjoyed it. We had such a great time. We were, the final die roll was like the dramatic climax to the movie, and the Union ended up winning it. So even though it was just a narrow tactical victory, it was still very exciting. And actually, you can see these markers here. Both Longstreet and Rosecrans were forced to stay in combat mode from the 4th turn to the 5th turn in their current locations, even though we both desperately wanted to move them. And that's actually what allowed the Union to make some advances up here, because they were out of Longstreet's combat range, and Polk was in maneuver mode. So with Thomas here able to support those attacks, you just get like this really interesting narrative happening as you're playing the game, with how units are performing and how your leaders are supporting combat. So yeah, I can't wait to play this again. We've decided that we're going to try and do this kind of semi-regularly every couple of weeks. I think we're going to try and tackle Chattanooga or the Wilderness next. And then from there, maybe go on to one of the bigger ones like Chancellorsville or Spotsylvania. But there's so many great games that have come out so far this year, and this one has really intrigued me. I've actually played 2 games this week that I think are just so smart and really dialed in terms of the experience they provide. I won't spoil what that other one is yet, but I'm hoping to have some video of some kind on that soon. But yeah, Rebel Fury, definitely worth your time. Very excited that Mark Herman has got Volume 2 on P500 already, and he's also working on Volume 3. I think that this is a system that will go down sort of as a classic for the Civil War with so much content for it in such a short period of time. Something that's easily playable, but extremely narrative and dramatic, and something that you could teach people to play pretty easily. So it doesn't hurt that the maps are gorgeous either. So anyways, that was just a quick after-action report of my Chickamauga Rebel Fury experience. And, there'll be more of this in my life this year, for sure.